Alrighty, we are live today with Joe Brown, aka Heresy Financial. Thank you much for joining me today, Joe.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on.
So, the reason why I hit you up and I'm so excited to have you here is because I've been on a whirlwind of a journey through learning about finance and economics the last few years since around 2020. And your YouTube channel was huge for me. It provided so much context for all the things I was hearing. It helped me filter out the noise. So, first of all, I just want to give you a huge thanks and a shout out. I'll be
Mm,
putting that in the show
Thank
notes
you.
for sure so everyone can go check it out. You've been super consistent over the years. I'd love to just start with your background, your story, how you came from young Joe Brown to Heresy Financial, Mr. Quarter Million YouTube subscribers.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so I grew up in a fairly normal household. Great parents, but I had three siblings. There were four of us, but my parents had a ton of credit card debt growing up, and so that caused a lot of issues as financial stress normally would. And always cars breaking down, that type of thing. And I didn't realize it at the time. I just thought we were poor. And didn't realize it at the time. It was just basically bad financial decisions. And fast forward a few years later, my parents lost everything in the financial crisis. We lost our childhood home. They had a bunch of rental properties with adjustable rate mortgages and all that. And so I grew up learning nothing about the right way to handle money, anything about financial education. And there was one thing that I thought I knew, which was that if you wanted to make money, you had to get a good job, and to do that, you had to go to college. To do that, you had to get good grades. And so I did that, got good grades, went to college. I got a scholarship, but again, I knew nothing about money, and so I got a scholarship, and I worked, and I took out the max student loans possible. So I graduated with $30,000 debt, zero money in my bank account. I was working at a nonprofit organization at the time. And so I had to fundraise for my own salary, and I was really bad at it. So I made like $4 an hour. And so I was like literally broke after college. And my wife and I got married right after college, and so she made $35,000 a year at the time, and I thought she made a ton of money because compared to me. So I was like, we got ourselves into a bad financial situation, didn't know how to get out of it, so I started like just searching. Stumbled across Dave Ramsey, the debt snowball, budgeting, personal finance, that kind of stuff. And so that we kind of followed that plan. And in a year, well, first I had to get a real job. So I got a desk job at Amazon, and it sucked, but it was $40,000 a year. So together we were making 75, and we were able to get out of debt within the first year of being married. We lived on rice and beans, like nothing. Lived in a terrible area of town. Our rent was six hundred
And
fifty
what
dollars a
year was
month.
this, just for reference?
This was 2014. We got
Okay.
married, so yeah, just under a year later, we had finished getting out of debt. Um, and so during that time, I was like, well, we were getting out of debt that first year. I was talking with a buddy of mine who was a stockbroker, and I was like, look, I don't know how to learn more about this stuff, but like, I want to learn more about investing. Like, I just discovered the stock market and what a mutual fund is, and so he's like, look, if you really enjoy this stuff, he's like, I can get you a job in our broker training program. I was like, there's no way. And he's like, no, I can walk you through the interview process and help you get in. So he did. So in 2015, I became a stockbroker, and it was like, process was get licensed, and then I'm just doing grunt work. It was glorified customer service representative, but um, it was a start. I was learning from the inside of the belly of the beast. I was discovering how everything in the financial system worked. Now, the other thing that happened at the time was my wife and I had our first kid. So she stopped working. She went home. So we went back down to basically having no money. Um, but the nice thing was, like, this is how like kind of like financial education works, is that like the more like the more it makes problems easier to deal with. Because the thing about problems is money doesn't solve every problem, but it does solve every money problem. And most problems are actually just money problems in disguise. And so we went down to having, just again, $40,000 of income with my wife and new baby at home. But we were able to handle that because we had spent an entire year doing the same thing, getting out of debt. And now we had a little bit of a path ahead of us too. So I just dove in, started learning everything I could. I became a trader, learned about options, just the whole financial system, did a bunch of different positions, different jobs, so I could learn long-term wealth management and portfolio allocation, and got into a sales position. And so it was a course of about 5 years. And after 5 years, I was in a sales role, making $250,000 a year, which was like, obviously it's a very good salary. So went from, in 5 years, basically broke, negative net worth, to 250 grand a year. And the funny thing is, I was miserable. I actually hated it. I really enjoyed being in charge of how much money I made to a certain point. But I didn't like the 200 cold calls a day. I didn't like the repetitive nature of my job, just bringing assets in the door. And I had always wanted to work for myself, always wanted to start a business. I just never had the skills or the financial education or financial position to be able to do so. So at this point, now I'm in this job that I don't like, making a bunch of good money. I have savings. We had an investment property at the time, and I had started learning about how economics worked outside of my job. So learned about how the financial system worked through my career, but then outside was like discovering people like Peter Schiff and Ray Dalio, and learning about Austrian economics, and came to a point where I was like, I don't want to keep selling what I'm selling anymore. It's not, I don't really believe in it. I don't think people should be doing, the things that I'm telling them to do. So that's in June of 2019, I quit my job and started Heresy Financial. I really had no plan. It was kind of a bad plan, actually. It was like, I've got 6 months to make money. And if I don't, then I'm going to have to go get another job. And so the way I was paying the bills during that 6 months was, number one, it was a sales role before, so I had commission checks coming in. Number two, investment property income. Number three, savings. And so over that 6 months, I started Heresy Financial. I tried self-publishing books. I did, one-on-one financial consultations. I started my YouTube channel. I started a podcast, started a blog, did a couple other things. By 5.5 months later, I had still made $0. Like, nothing was working. And then two things happened in December of 2019. The first thing happened was I had one video that blew up, got like 50,000 views, and got me 1,000 subscribers. On YouTube, that's the mark to get monetized. The second thing that happened was I had my first sale of a course, an online course that I had created. And I still remember I was filling up my gas. I was feeling depressed, like I was about to quit, like sad that I couldn't make any money. I was filling up my gas. I pull up my phone to check my email, and an email notification, popped up, said, course sale, $299. It was like, to this day, one of the most euphoric feelings. Yeah. And it's like, obviously that's not enough to do anything with, but it was like, now there's evidence, like, this can work. Like, I finally made my first dollar.
Yeah.
So that's when I
Opening
decided,
the floodgates is the best feeling. Just priming the pump a little bit. It's ready to roll.
Right. Yeah. So that's when I decided to go all in on YouTube. So I stopped doing literally everything else that I was trying. I just made a YouTube video every single day. Like, that's what I did for a year straight through 2020, from January through December of 2020. Every single day, wake up, figure out what to make a video about, script the video, record the video, put it on my computer, edit the video, go have dinner and hang out with the kids for a couple hours. They go to bed, go back in the office, finish editing, and then upload for, publishing the next morning, and then start the process over. Working a little bit on the weekends too. And so it was a grind. And over the course of 2020, slowly but surely making like a little bit more at a time. So it was like, all right, if I keep this up, it would be, I maybe have 3 months to go before I need to go get another job. Now it's like I have 2 months, and now it's like I have 3 months. And finally, by November of 2020, was the first month I made like $2,800 from YouTube. And that was enough to cover our expenses at the time. So runway becomes infinite at that point. You can keep on going forever. And so it took me a year and a half. I thought it was going to take me 6 months. It ended up taking me a year and a half, but then it just, kind of went from there. And I learned a lot of lessons after that, and continued to try and make the channel better and better and better. And so now that's what I'm doing. I'm making YouTube channels to teach about, or making YouTube videos to teach people about how money actually works, because the more I've learned about how money works, the more money I've made, both in business and in investing. And the other thing that I do is Heresy Financial University. It's kind of like my inside track membership where members get access to like really in-depth financial education about all sorts of, how to trade options, how to allocate your portfolio, like everything I've learned from my mistakes and my career about everything money and investing related, really deep in those topics to, start, making more money.
Awesome, man. Thank you for sharing that. I just love that story because I think it speaks to a lot of people who are in a similar position of knowing that they hate their job and they don't want to do it forever or at all. And so they're
Yeah.
looking for ways that they can get out of that grind by doing something they actually care about, something they're good at, and something they enjoy and can provide for
Hmm.
themselves, their family, and so forth. And
Yeah.
another thing you said there that resonates with me hard, and I know a lot of other people that I'm close with, is that sometimes the time you think it's going to take is just impossible to predict because you had a couple of wild cards pop off there. You got one video that went hard, and that basically got the gears turning for you. And so many people are, they're working hard, they're waiting for that moment, but it's like that. And you've posted this meme before on several videos of the guy pickaxing through the dirt super close to the diamonds, right? Where you're
Mm,
getting closer and closer, and if you just stop and you give up, then it's over, and you're going to be
yeah.
forgotten. It's not going to work. But if you just keep grinding, that's when you're going to make a name for yourself. Like if you
Yeah.
just never give
Well,
up, you're going to get there.
that's the like when you look at what most successful people say about why they had success, you're going to see two common themes. Number one, never give up, and number two, luck. It's like, well, which one was it? And the reality is, like when you like the fishing analogy, there's nothing you can do to control which fish swim under your boat, right? But if you never cast the net in, you guarantee you can't catch any fish, right? So 100%, there's a ton of luck involved in success. That's actually a good thing because there's a lot of luck out there. So that means if you want to succeed, you have to do the actions over and over and over enough times so that you have a chance to catch some of that luck. It's like that's why it's the saying is luck is where opportunity and preparedness meet. You've got to have both.
I love that. Yeah, just you need the biggest service area possible to catch one of
Hmm.
those
Yeah,
random blessings that is going to happen eventually if you just never give up. So
right.
I love that. Another question here, just in terms of creating content on something so important like finance as you do. I know you talk a lot about the traditional education system, and so I'm very curious how that played a part. Did you know early on that the educational system we run under now is just not very well designed to help people learn? And did you use that to form how you create your content and how you educate, or did you not figure that out till later?
So this is the answer to that is no. Like a couple things. So number one, my natural mental tendency is like, I remember from the time being very young that like kind of like the most conservative type of mental outlook that you can have, like extreme. This is black. This is white. There's no such thing as a gray area. If the rules say to do this, that's the right thing to do. Like that's how I was kind of like raised and brought up. And I was raised in the church. I'm a Christian. I went to a Christian school my whole life. Actually, my degree that I talked about earlier when I went to college, I went to go be a pastor. My degree is in Christian ministries and my minor in biblical studies. So I have no business being where I am today based on like my background at all. And it took it took number one a decision to make a change and make a difference, and then number two being open minded about what the truth is, that can take me where I want to go. And along that process, started to learn, like you talked about, something about like the traditional financial education system, which is actually it was developed in Prussia from the desks in a row to the bells to the concrete walls. Literally everything about it was designed to brainwash and form kids into soldiers. This was Prussia. It was like 18 something in the 1800s. It was designed to create a docile military civilization. And there were a few industrialists in the 1800s that went over to Prussia, viewed how the system worked, and they realized if we make some really small tweaks, we can import the same system, and instead of churning out soldiers, we churn out employees, churn out workers, and we can create an American workforce for these large industrial companies. And so that's exactly what they did. And the school system has never changed since it was introduced that way. It's still like the bells, the desks, the walking in line, the tests where it's like, hey, learn and regurgitate.
Asking
No,
permission if you need to take a piss. Like
exactly.
you can't
Yes,
do
there's
anything without asking
right.
for permission and raising your hand.
100%. There's no cooperation between people. It's just individual. It's like everything about the school system we can see is designed that it doesn't put you up for financial success, whether that's in business or in investing. And that's because that's not the point of it. The point of school is to create an employee workforce. And it's actually really good at that. Like that's what it's designed for. It does that. Puts people through the grade system, through college, and gets you into a job. It's actually very difficult to unlearn those things. Like I said, my hard wiring was like very like employee based, like do the right things, follow the order, like look for somebody who's telling you what to do and then do that as good as possible. And so it was actually very difficult to unlearn those habits and start a business where nobody was telling me what direction to go or what the next step is. Like it's a very difficult thing to unlearn. I think most people are probably in that camp. There are some people that are kind of born with that entrepreneurial like mindset of bucking the trend and doing things and being rebellious. And I don't think that's most of us, and it definitely wasn't me. But you can unlearn it, thankfully. Some of the success that I've had recently is kind of a testament to that. But it's not designed that way. And even in investing, because if you know about compounding interest and you know about investing, and you know about some of the basics of personal money management, you can be free from the workforce in a very short amount of time. Like you can be financially independent far before you're 65 if you just do the right things early on. But we need a workforce until people are 65, so they don't teach people how to do that.
Yeah, right. And one of the side effects of that system, which basically just churns out employees off an assembly line, is it's really built to crush creativity and thinking outside the box because it needs you to stay
Yeah.
inside the box to make that employee, which is why so many people that I surround myself with are the weirdest of the weirdos, the only people I hang out with who are able to completely take a 180 after they're done with that and say like, you know what, that was all kind of just not me. Like I
Yeah.
want to do my own thing. I want to do what I love and I want to be creative and be rewarded for being unique, which is the opposite of what the schooling system does for most people, and especially, universities, which have this extremely high reputation. But after going through it, like you and I both did, I kind of look back today and I just say, the main value I got out of that was making friends and the social aspect. The classes kind of
Yeah.
they're very cookie cutter. You know, and so there's this kind of reawakening going on of all these people, a lot of millennials, which I assume you are one, I'm one as well, especially
Mhm.
for our generations. We're starting to see the opportunities to completely break that mold and do our own thing. You've done it through YouTube. I'm still early in my journey. I'm experimenting a little bit with podcasts and blogging and, other things like that. But there's opportunity out there. And I really, that's one of the reasons why I started this podcast, because so many people just think, and this is actually a good extra question here, is so many people think it's too late for me. It's too saturated. There's too many podcasts out there. There's too many YouTube channels. There's no way to get started. What do you say to those people? What's your response to that? Because I'm sure you've maybe felt that at some point as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is where, kind of having a little bit of I don't know, a little bit of narcissistic self-delusion might actually come in handy. But I'm sure for everybody out there, you've watched a YouTube channel and you've thought, I know more than them about this topic. I can speak more eloquently about this topic. I'm a bit better video editor than this video. I can produce that way better than what that is, and that got X many views and made this many dollars. I'm sure that's happened to everybody. So number one, like there's no such thing as like winner take all as in everything. Otherwise, you wouldn't have new burger restaurants popping up. The reason why you still today have new burger restaurants popping up, even though there's a McDonald's on every corner, is because there's a market for burgers. And if you can differentiate and be a little bit better in one thing that people care about, you can find your audience and you can find your customers. It was like, I don't know what, like 15 years ago, where there were literally only 6 locations of Five Guys, and they were all in Washington, D.C. And now it's literally like, everywhere. And a lot of people say it's the best fast food cheeseburger there is. And they're wrong because it's In and Out. But I'll let just for the sake of discussion, we can talk about Five Guys. And it's like, it didn't take away from McDonald's at all. Like, there's just some people that are wanting Five Guys as well. And so, because the thing that their customers care about, they view as quality, and it's worth it to them. And so that's the space on YouTube. Number one is that there's a way that that you can do something better than the competition. And the fact that there's competition means there's a market. It doesn't mean it's saturated. It means there's a market. If you try and invent the next Facebook or the something that doesn't exist, you have no idea whether there's a market for it, because number one, you have to create the product. Number two, you have to convince people that they should want it or that they should need it. It's much harder than just taking something that already exists. There's already competition. That means there's demand, doing that same thing but better or in your own way. The second thing about it is that it's not saturated at all. And here's what I mean by that. Let's talk about YouTube still. How many YouTube channels do you watch or have you watched? 1? No. 2? No. Probably like 300. You've probably watched videos from hundreds of different channels, because for every one thing that you produce, you're consuming like dozens of things. So by and large, people are far more consumers of everything than they are producers of anything. So if you come into a space to be a producer of content, let's say, in an area that you already think might be saturated, number one, you're just saying, I'm going to do something where there's already demand. I'm going to do it better. And it doesn't matter if my audience also watches my competition or also watches makeup tutorials and also watches race car videos and also watches, Mr. Beast. There's still, it doesn't mean they can't consume my content also. Really, it's just a game of attention. So it's, there's 24 hours in every day. There's sleep, there's family time, there's work. Like where can I fit in of 8 billion people on Earth? And there's a lot more opportunity than most people think.
Absolutely. And I love the point you started with, which is, if you're a little bit narcissistic or think you're pretty awesome, that's great. That's a good opportunity to use that to get started. And even if you don't feel like you're extremely smart or an authority on something, you still have a unique human perspective that other people may be willing to listen to and hear from. Like, for me personally, I feel like my niche is not being like this super smart authority figure, because I'm not. But I've always been a questioner. I question everything all the time. I've always been that kid, going through school. Speaking of school, I was always the one asking questions when everyone else was too embarrassed to. So I was like, I've always been like this. Like, why not start a podcast? I'll ask smart people questions and I'll provide value to people. And it's a true free market in a way of just democratizing information. And I think pretty much almost everyone can agree, except for maybe baby boomers, that the mainstream media is complete garbage at this point. Anyone that's turned on a TV just knows that it's very clearly curated to spark emotions, make people angry at other peasants about, stupid things, while there's much more important things going on. So the fact that we now have these platforms that are much more open to finding your own research, doing your own research, learning your own way, I think that's just extremely valuable to everyone. And I know some people may, be a little critical because some of these platforms, not getting too specific, may have a little bit of a heavy hand with censorship and whatnot. But yeah, I think that as long as we just keep pushing the good information out, it's eventually going to be unstoppable. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'd like to comment on for anybody who's like looking to start, whether it's on YouTube or, a different type of business. I think the number two, complementary skills are the foundation of starting a business, working for yourself. So the two most important ones that cross over it has to be something that, number one, you are good at, number two, that you enjoy. Because if you're not good at it, even at the very least in your own view, then you're not going to be good at it for, in other people's view. Number two, something that you enjoy, because it's going to take you a lot longer to succeed than you think. And so you've got to enjoy it. Otherwise you won't be able to persist long enough to succeed. That's good enough to start. What you're going to find is there's going to be other skills that you lack. So like for me, the thing that I enjoyed and was good at was discussing financial topics that are complex in a way that's easy to understand for most people. So I was like, all right, well, that's perfect for a YouTube channel or a podcast or a blog or something like that. And what I found was, like specifically with YouTube, the skill that I was lacking was talking to a camera alone in my office. Very different than talking to a person, even over the internet like this, let alone face to face. So that was a skill that I was lacking. Number two, a skill I was lacking was video editing. It's like, I don't even know what I'm looking at when I open up a video editor for the first time. Number three is like thumbnails. Number four is like titles. Like there's all sorts of other skills that are complementary that you will have to learn. And so just recognize that. But those first two crossover skills of something that you're good at and something you enjoy will get you started. You just have to be open to, what are the other things that I'm missing, whether it's team management or hiring or sourcing, products or supplies or marketing or paid ads, whatever those other skills are. There's going to be other skills you have to learn, you have to learn them.
Yeah, and just embracing the fact that it's going to be a journey. There's going to be a lot of character building, long nights in the office. I've certainly had them where trying to figure out why your website is not working or the HTML is not working or video is taking too long to upload, or there's just some, frustrating obstacle somewhere. And that's like any entrepreneurial journey, and completely agree with the fact that you need to really enjoy what you're doing first and foremost. I mean, that's like cliche at this point, but it's so true, because it takes a long time to turn it into a business for those that want to do that. It takes a lot of effort and grinding. And for me personally, I know that, I mean, I just started this podcast, so it's tiny. And, my first few videos get basically no views. And like, I don't even care. I'm super happy to have it out there. I'm proud to have this value I put out into the world. And it doesn't really matter to me if millions of people aren't seeing it, because I have it there. It's going to be there forever. And I'm proud to be building something. And I think a lot of other people should think about that. Like, just the perspective of, you're creating something that is useful for the world, whether or not it's gaining a ton of attention immediately is irrelevant. I'm the type of person that I love having resources to point people towards when they have questions for me, because it's impossible to like answer questions in depth for everybody, especially around things like money and finance, like, for example, if someone's asking me about like, why is the Federal Reserve so bad? I point them to your channel, say, go watch this guy's video to find out. I don't have time to talk for an hour all the time, to rant about these things. So it's just good to have those resources for people and just have a library of education. It's just much more efficient that way. People can like really dive into the rabbit hole. And I'm seeing so many more people just waking up, and like, because the friction is so little on platforms like YouTube and X, Twitter, Instagram, whatever, people can really get sucked into these different creators that really resonate with them. Like we said earlier, how every creator resonates with different people in a certain way, which is why you should go for it. And it really awakens people and brings them to a higher level of consciousness and understanding of the world. So it's just a super powerful movement to be a part of, to just stop worrying about, how many people are already doing it. Just get started, go for it. If you have a little extra savings, that's great. You have a little bit of runway, and just don't stress out about not, being famous overnight. I just think it's a really, really cool thing to be a part of.
Mm-hmm.
So when we were chatting before recording, I kind of told you how there's so many different directions we could take this, because I also want to rack your brain about some financial things, because that's what you do. So now that we've talked about the creators a little bit, I'd love to just get into the money side, because
Let's do
this
it.
is how I originally found you in 2020. Was I was at my own fiat job after work. I was, our parking lot had Wi-Fi, so I'd literally just go out in my car and just kick back with my phone on YouTube and just watch videos and just learn. And so, tell me about the Federal Reserve, Joe Brown. I want to hear,
Yeah.
what is this giant bank people talk about, and why should people care about this institution? Because most people have heard of it before. They don't really know why it's so important in their daily lives.
Yeah, good question. There's a couple different ways to take this, so I'll be as brief of an overview as possible, and then we can dive in on some specifics. When you put your money in the bank, uh, let's say it's Chase Bank, you put $1 into your account. Chase doesn't just keep that dollar there. Chase has to do something with that dollar because they have, salaries they have to pay, they have rent they have to pay, they have lights they have to keep on. So they take a good portion of that dollar and they go do something with it to make money with it. Now, when you don't see any of that, it always will tell you you can get that dollar back at any time. But in reality, they are doing something with that dollar. Usually, what they're doing is creating a loan with that dollar. So they're taking your dollar and they're going to let somebody else borrow that dollar. And so that's going to be somebody who wants to buy a house, a car, credit card, whatever. Or most of the time, it's actually going to be the U.S. government. They're going to loan it to the U.S. government. Now, the funny thing is about that, they're going to take your dollar. They're going to let somebody else borrow that dollar. That dollar goes into somebody else's bank account as a deposit that's then spent to somebody else. And when it's in that new bank account, so like let me use an actual example of a mortgage. So you put your dollar in your bank account. So it says you can get your dollar at any time. The bank takes that and gives it to somebody who's buying a house. So they take that dollar and the person uses that dollar to buy a house. So that dollar ends up in the bank account of the house seller. So now the house seller has $1 in their bank account that their bank says you can get this at any time. But it actually came from your bank account, and your bank account is telling you you can get that dollar at any time. This is actually how the banking system works. It's called fractional reserve banking, and it means that money is loaned into existence. That is how money is created, is through loans. What it also means is anytime debt is paid off, that is money actually ceasing to exist. It's getting destroyed. It is leaving circulation. The debt disappears and the dollar ceases to exist. So most of the time, there's more loans being created, all together on net. And so the money supply usually grows. So that's how your bank works. But the problem is, let's go back to, the late 1800s when there was no Federal Reserve. The problem is, if I go to my bank and I try and get my dollar, that's fine. If somebody else does the same thing, and then somebody else does the same thing, let's say we're worried that maybe that bank gave out some mortgages, and maybe we think those mortgages might not be able to pay. Now we think that bank doesn't have the ability to get our dollars back for us. I want to be first in line to get my dollars out because I know they have some dollars. They just don't have all the dollars. So I'm going to go get my dollars. Then I'm going to call my friend and I'm going to say, hey, go get your dollars. So they go get theirs out. And that sparks a bank run. And this is not a thing of the past. We saw this last March, but this is what a bank run is. We think the bank doesn't have the money they say they do, so I'm going to get my money first and then tell everybody else to go get theirs. In the 1800s, when this would happen, a bank would collapse and it would close. And whoever got their money first would get all their money. Anybody who didn't get their money first lost everything. So they, in 1913, they passed the Federal Reserve Act to create the Federal Reserve, which is a central bank. A central bank is very simply a bank for other banks. And so just like you put your money in the bank, a bank puts their money in their bank, the Federal Reserve. So every bank has an account at the Federal Reserve. What this means is that when I take my money out of one bank, usually unless I'm getting cash out, money is going to only leave my account if it's going into some other bank account. So when I spend money, when I withdraw money to send it somewhere else, no matter what I do with my money, it's going to go to another bank account. So system wide, the theory was there's always enough cash everywhere in the system. It's just a problem that one bank might have not enough and another bank might have more than enough. So we're going to create a central bank on top of all the banks. That way, if one bank has a bank run, they can pull money from the central bank and the central bank can give them a loan, which is money from all the other banks, so that that bank doesn't go under. That seems good in theory, but the problem is you cannot eliminate risk. You can only transfer risk. And when you have risk isolated to individual nodes in a system, like individual banks, the bank has the skin in the game and the incentive to be as conservative as possible. Otherwise, a bank run happens and they go out of business. Also, whoever was in charge of that bank will never be able to lead a bank again. Also, everybody who had their money in that bank and lost their money will be very, very careful with whoever they trust their money with next time, which means when one bank fails, all the other banks tighten up and they're like, we got to make sure we are being very careful.
It's a natural
What happened?
cleansing mechanism that helps
Yes,
the whole market. Yeah.
right. What happens when you have an entity that transfers the individual risk to the entire system is kind of like what would happen if you put up a fence at the Grand Canyon. With no fence, people are scared. They might get close and look over and then back away. Somebody falls over, now everybody's really scared and very few people ever get close to the edge. When you put up a really strong fence, everybody feels like it's safe to get as close as possible. They might climb on the fence. They might get on the other side of the fence to look over. Suddenly, you have too many people doing that. The fence fails. Everybody falls and dies at once. And that's what happens when you transfer risk from individuals to a system. So what we saw was in 1913, the Federal Reserve was created. The risk was transferred from individual banks to the entire banking system. 7 years later, in 1920, we had the first Great Depression. You can read the book, The Forgotten Depression by James Grant. It was called the Great Depression until 9 years later when another one happened that was even bigger. And so that was a result of the malpractice of the central bank, keeping rates too low, too much risk building up in the system, and then a big collapse everywhere all at once, which hadn't happened before. They repeated their exact same mistakes after that first depression. A couple years later, kept interest rates too low, let risk build up in the system. 1929, the bubble popped, everything collapsed again for the second time, even bigger than the first time. So within, what is that? 17 years of the creation of the central bank in the United States, we had the two biggest depressions that our country had ever seen. And prior to that, we had only had individual isolated little panics that resulted in very little money lost across the board. And so we've seen that pattern repeat over and over again. Ultimately, that scaled up to the entire world. When we put the world on the dollar standard, Bretton Woods, 1945, the Federal Reserve became the bank for the entire world instead of just American banks. And again, the risk built up in the system. Too many claims on the money were issued. Everybody realized there's not actually enough money. So what they do, they went and turned in to get their money out of the bank, which in reality, that was exchanging their dollars for gold. They were getting their money out of the bank. There wasn't enough. So Nixon had to close the gold window in 1971. Otherwise, it would have been closed 2 weeks later when, we ran out of all the gold. So it was the exact same thing that had always happened before. It's just a classic bank run. And so since then, since 1971, the Federal Reserve has been it's been unleashed. Like there's no restraint holding back monetary policy from creating as much money as possible. Now, the constraint has been we don't want to tip over into hyperinflation, but that hasn't been a constraint to stop us from getting very, very close a couple of times, like in the early 70s and again in the last couple of years. So the Federal Reserve is the entity that has the control over the money supply, a monopoly on money creation. It is the bank for other banks. It controls interest rates. It controls the money supply. And as a result, we have a ton of economic risk built up in the system.
Excellent. Thank you for that explanation. So, if I'm someone who is not super deep into the financial realm, my eyes are glazing over a little bit hearing that. I'm just, working a job trying to provide for myself and my family and build a future. Why does this clusterfuck of a financial system matter to me?
Well, number one, let's say every year at your job, you get a 3-4% raise. When you get that raise, you feel like That's a good step up. But in reality, every dollar that you make has already lost at least that amount in purchasing power. So the let's say there's, all the goods and services that are created in the economy for this year. Um, let's call that the total stock of wealth. And then there's all of the money. You can take the money and you can purchase the stuff. Let's say we do just an automatic magic for every dollar that exists. Now there's $2 that exist. So your paycheck goes, your salary goes from 100 grand to 200 grand. Your bank account goes from 10 grand to 20 grand. Your gallon of milk goes from $5 to $10. Your like literally everything, every dollar amount, whether it's a bank account or a price, or I'm sorry, every dollar that exists doubles. What would happen is every price would have to double as well to adjust for it, because your salary is double, that means costs double, that means prices double, like everything, same number of stuff. So nothing in reality actually changed, just the number on it changed. Now, if we had, on the other hand, a doubling of all the stuff, but the total number of dollars stayed the same, like think about how like just life changing and amazing this would be for most people. Let's say the
Right.
number of computers in the world instantly doubled. The number of loaves of bread instantly doubled. The number of houses instantly doubled. The number of cars instantly doubled. It's like, first of all, the value of each of those things collapses because it's very necessary that I have one place to live. It's not very necessary that I have two places to live, but it's nice. And so if I have two places to live suddenly, I could sell one of those places to live for some money that I might want to use to get something else instead. When the supply of everything increases drastically like that, the price is going to have to adjust downwards because it's just not as urgent of a need as the first unit of that thing is. Like, I need one car to get to work. My second car is for fun, right? I don't need that as much as I need the first one. And so you would instantly see the prices of everything in the world collapse, probably about half. So instead of spending, $10 on anything, now it's $5. So that's the relationship between the money supply and the stock of wealth. When you get a raise, that feels nice. But if at the same time they've been printing money and your dollars have been losing purchasing power as a result because there's more money compared to all the stuff, then your raise just gets you back up to even, hopefully. Most people's raises don't even do that. So you're slowly working harder and harder to get more and more money, and you have to spend less and less and less. Like, you can't afford as much stuff as before. So that's the number one reason why people should care, is because it influences the decisions you make to actually get ahead financially. And if you don't understand how the system works like this, then you may make decisions that ultimately leave you in a place that you don't want to be in. You thought you were headed one direction. Really, you were living under the rules of a system that existed 100 years ago. But the rules of the game are different now. It doesn't work that way anymore. So you need to be playing the game under the right set of rules so you can actually get ahead and win.
Right. And the math, the general math that people need to understand isn't entirely overcomplicated. It's just the fact that using your, say you get a raise at work, you get 5% raise, but if at the same time inflation goes up by 8% due to the government printing a few $1 trillion for some new fighter jets and tanks, uh, everything gets more expensive because the money supply. I think the money supply and just understanding that growth of the money supply is actually debasing the currency they hold is that piece that most people are missing. Because right now, I think that the majority of the population, and disagree with me if you want, because you have a good view of the people on your channel, is that people understand that, man, it seems like I'm making more money this year than I was a couple of years ago, but it's harder to live. Like, why is that? Like, why is it so expensive to pay my rent anywhere, to get food anywhere? Everything's just getting more difficult. And like, that doesn't make sense, because shouldn't we be getting more efficient at making these goods and services as a species, because we're getting so efficient with all these communication channels of social media and teamwork? We should be getting better at making these things. And look at these TVs in the store. One of your recent videos I watched used TVs as an analogy of this is what should actually be happening, where deflation occurs and we see TVs getting better and better as they get cheaper. So maybe if you could explain that a little more in depth, and why doesn't that apply to other things like rent and food?
Yeah, great question. There's one reason only, and it's government. So when you look at all of the areas that have the most government involvement, those are the areas that get way more expensive compared to income for everybody every single year. They just skyrocket in price. So we're talking about things like healthcare, we're talking about things like education, we're talking about things like um, uh, uh, housing. That's a big one, even though that's local government instead of federal government for the most part. So we have these areas that have the most government involvement get the most expensive investments, like paper assets, like stocks, the stock market. When you have the things that have the least government involvement, those things actually have gotten much cheaper, because that's the way that things naturally go without artificial intervention. So the TV is a great example of this. Literally just the other day, I was in Costco and I was looking at the TVs, and it was like a 65-inch 4K TV was $429. It's like, I can't believe this. Like, I remember, it seems like just a couple years ago, I could barely find a 42-inch TV for, $400. Um,
I remember seeing
so the
thousands and
reason is,
thousands of dollars for those TVs, like not that long ago. It was
yeah,
thousands. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. It's crazy how this has happened, and the reason is because there's no government intervention, and so you have pure free market activity taking place, where one company makes a TV as good as possible, as cheap as possible, so they can capture as much of the market as possible. And everybody else is scrambling to do the exact same thing, to make a better TV at a more affordable price so they can capture the market. So it's just a race to the bottom. And that's how normal wealth production happens. More production, more output for the same number of resources and the same inputs. Way cheaper to make TVs today because companies have figured out cheaper ways to make them so that they can have bigger profit margins. It's way easier. There's more economies of scale. There's more factories that produce this stuff. It's just everything. It's in a good way. It's a race to the bottom, and that leaves consumers with the choice of tons of fantastic products at fantastic prices. There's zero reason why this can't happen to everything. Like, how come TVs, which are just complicated electronics, get orders of magnitude cheaper over the course of a couple decades, but something like an MRI machine can't? It's just a complicated electronic. The only reason is because of government intervention. So what do I mean by government intervention? Number one, subsidies. When you have artificial money being taxed and thrown at something, there is no incentive for the creator to come up with a better product at a lower price to incentivize the end consumer. The end consumer is throwing money with no regard at it. And if you raise the price without touching the quality, you still get the sale. So that's no incentive to create a better product at a cheaper price. It's the opposite, actually. Same exact thing has happened with education. The reason why education has gotten so expensive is because the federal government started guaranteeing and subsidizing student loans. So suddenly you have somebody who is the worst credit-worthy borrower because they have no income and no assets and no job history that can take out hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt guaranteed by the government. What do you think colleges are going to do? They're going to raise their prices because they can capture this massive amount of money. And guess what? When you look at the quality of education, the number of professors per student in a classroom, all of the metrics of grades and the outputs that you should care about, none of those have gotten better over the last couple of decades. The one thing that has grown, the number of administrators. The more money government throws at students, the more administrators are hired, and the more money colleges and universities get to keep for themselves. And so, same exact thing has happened in healthcare. When you look at the number of physicians, it's grown very, very slowly along with population, but the number of administrators in healthcare, it's a hockey stick along with the amount of money that's been printed and borrowed to be spent on healthcare. It's not a matter of throwing money at the problem. It's actually a matter of not throwing money at it. And then all of the bad stuff dies and only the good stuff survives and then thrives. I don't know if that I don't know if that answers your question, but that's
Absolutely.
definitely the reality that we face.
Absolutely, man. And the reason why I love you, Joe, is that the passion is so palpable. I love that you're just so into this stuff. You get riled up, and that's why find something you love to do, and you'll never work another day in your life, as they say. So I love it.
Sure.
We are getting close to our hour here, so why don't we wrap up with one final question that ties it all together? We're both huge sound money advocates. I'm
Mm.
100% on Bitcoin side. Basically, you might be looking at gold a little bit more. You can maybe get into that. But how does sound money and just fixing that base layer of value that people transact fix these problems you've explained?
Yes, good question.
Good
Okay, so
luck
sound money
solving this in
definitely
4 minutes.
fixes. Right. Exactly. Yeah. Sound money definitely fixes this. I'm going to answer this in two ways because there's like the system issue, which is like the would be nice. And then there's like, what can I actually do if I can't control the way that everything else goes? Because there's, that's we at the end of the day we can't. So what can we do to protect and help ourselves? Um, Sound money is a leash on what I would just say in general government evil, because they can't artificially confiscate your purchasing power to spend on whatever they want to spend on, which ultimately is more power for themselves. When the government borrows money and spends it into existence because the money supply is increasing as a result through fiat inflation, what they're doing is they are spending dollars that have real purchasing power as a result of that dollar taking its purchasing power from all of the other previously existing dollars. So it's a tax that you can't vote for and you can't see. When you get taxes taken out of your paycheck, you can see it. But if all of the money the government spent came just from taxes out of your paycheck, you'd be left with probably about 25% instead of the 60% that you have right now. You would see it, there'd be revolution and riot. It's like, I'm not paying the government 3/4 of the year and then working 1/4 of the year for myself. So they take half of your paycheck directly in taxes, but they still want to spend a lot more. So they borrow, and through inflation, they spend the rest of it. And so your dollars are just devalued the rest of the way. And that's how your spending power is transferred to the government for them to spend on. Sound money, you cannot do that. If there was a 100% gold backed reserve system where gold was money again, they couldn't do that. That's why they slowly transitioned over decades into a gold backed system and then a pure fiat system so that they could have more spending power for furthering their own power. If Bitcoin becomes the reserve money everywhere, you cannot do that because you cannot just increase the money supply. Ultimately, any area where you try to increase the artificial supply through borrowing or lending or rehypothecation, because the base layer cannot expand, it at some point that little small bubble of claims on the real Bitcoin collapses. And so it lends itself towards a very, very stable money supply, which is a leash on government spending, because the only way then that they can spend is by taking it directly. And at a, excuse me, at a certain point, every government only exists at the will of the governed. And when people feel like they're being exploited too much, they stop the exploitation. And so it is definitely a leash on that. It's not a cure-all, but it's definitely a leash. And the resulting deflation that happens with a money supply that cannot increase means things get cheaper over time, which means debt gets harder to pay back over time, which is a leash on debt. It's just all around, it's much, much better. But we can't control what everybody else does. So the one thing that we can do is we can live in both worlds, right? So we can prepare for what we think is probably going to happen, which is a return to sound money at some point, because throughout all of human history, that's always what has happened. You get a big bubble over decades of bad money, and then it collapses into a new good money system. So we can prepare for that. We can buy things like gold. I like Bitcoin too. We can buy things like Bitcoin, have a certain percentage of our portfolio that's allocated to that. We can also live in the world that we're living in and play by the rules to get ahead in the current system, not because we're trying to advocate for it, but because we know how it works, and we want to be able to participate in this so that we're not left in the dust and only the bad guys have resources. So we can use debt to buy assets that cash flow, that increase in price or value with inflation that pays down our debt for us. We can invest in the paper assets that all of the richest people invest in. We can learn technical trading strategies or derivatives like options so that we can hedge ourselves, protect ourselves from big stock market crashes or rug pulls. So there are little things that we can do. You allocate your portfolio, have, 20, 30% in reserves, which is gold and Bitcoin and cash and some T-bills or money markets. You've got 30% in cash flowing real estate. You got about 30% in stocks. And then you have the other 10% for speculation and hedging. And you can do some very simple things like that to protect yourself and create massive amount of long-term wealth, regardless of what the rest of the world does.
Beautiful, man. I love that advice. That should definitely get people thinking, wondering what they should do with their money. Maybe, I mean, most of the people I know are pretty much all cash. Like the majority of friends from, that I look back on, it's all in the bank. And I try to tell them the bank is not safe for the reasons you outlined earlier. And
Yeah.
hopefully that gets through to people, and channels like yours are really helping with that. It's getting to tens of thousands of people in every video that I'm watching, sometimes much more. So appreciate the work you're putting in, man. Keep it up. I'll keep pushing people
Thank you.
your way. I'll make sure to include all your links in the show notes. Really appreciate you coming by, my friend.
Well, thank you again for having me.